In the winter of 1864, one of America's most beloved heroes rode into a stunningly beautiful canyon and methodically destroyed every living thing that grew there. He burned the crops. He slaughtered thousands of sheep. He took axes to over 3,000 peach trees, one by one, until nothing was left. His goal was simple: starve thousands of men, women, and children until they surrendered or died. Most people know Kit Carson as the ultimate frontiersman, the fearless scout who opened the American West. But the real story is far darker, far stranger, and far more heartbreaking than anything printed in a schoolbook. Because the man who committed that atrocity had spent his whole life loving the very people he destroyed. Christopher Houston Carson was born on December 24, 1809, in Richmond, Kentucky, a Christmas Eve baby in a family that already had more children than money. Before he could walk, the Carsons packed up and moved to the Missouri frontier, the raw edge of American settlement, where the forest was thick and the dangers were constant. And in 1818, when Kit was just 8 years old, one of those dangers found his father. Lindsay Carson was clearing land when a burning tree limb fell and killed him on the spot. The family was left destitute. Kit was pulled out of school to work, and he never went back. The boy who would become the hero of 1,000 books never learned to read a single one of them. For the rest of his life, the most famous frontiersman in America could barely scratch out his own name. At 14, his mother apprenticed him to a saddle maker in the town of Franklin, Missouri. Kit hated it. He was small, restless, and stuck sewing leather while caravans rolled past his window, heading down the Santa Fe Trail toward a wilderness he could smell but couldn't touch. So in September of 1826, at 16 years old, he ran away and joined one of them. His furious master did what the law required and posted a runaway notice in the Missouri Intelligencer, offering a reward for the boy's return. The amount he offered was exactly 1 cent. 1 penny for the boy who would one day conquer half a continent. It remains one of the worst appraisals in American history. But that penny-priced runaway was about to transform into something no one in Franklin could have imagined. For the next decade, Carson vanished into the mountains. He became a trapper, a mountain man, living so far beyond the edge of the United States that the United States barely existed to him. And here's the detail the schoolbooks always rush past. Kit Carson didn't just survive among Native American nations. He joined them. He learned to speak Navajo, Apache, Cheyenne, Arapaho, Paiute, Shoshone, and Ute, along with Spanish and French. He hunted with them, traded with them, wintered in their camps. And in 1836, at a trapper's rendezvous, he fell in love with an Arapaho woman named Wanebe, Singing Grass. He fought a mounted duel with a rival French trapper to win the right to court her, and he married her. She gave him a daughter, Adeline. By every account, those were the happiest years of his life, which makes what came next almost unbearable to watch. In 1839, Singing Grass died of a fever, likely following childbirth. Carson was left shattered, a widower in the wilderness with a small daughter to raise. In 1841, he tried again, marrying a Cheyenne woman named Making Out Road. It lasted only months. She divorced him in the traditional Cheyenne manner by placing all of his belongings outside the lodge. The 1840s equivalent of finding your boxes on the front lawn. Carson took the hint, took his daughter, and moved on. He eventually carried Adeline back to Missouri so she could get the education he never had. And on the riverboat home in 1842, he had a chance encounter that would change his life and doom thousands of others. The man he met was a young Army officer named John C. Fremont. Ambitious, vain, and hungry for glory, Fremont was about to lead a mapping expedition into the West, and he needed a guide. Carson, in his plain-spoken way, offered his services. It was the deal of Fremont's life. Over 3 expeditions, Carson guided him across deserts, over mountain passes, through country that killed lesser men. And Fremont went home and wrote it all up in best-selling reports that turned Kit Carson into a household name. The pulp writers took it from there. Dime novels cast him as a superhuman slayer of villains, rescuing golden-haired damsels by the dozen. Carson, who couldn't read a word of it, would reportedly just shake his head when the stories were read aloud to him. The legend had officially detached from the man, and the legend was about to be handed a gun. First, though, the man got married one more time. In February of 1843, in Taos, New Mexico, Carson wed Josefa Jaramillo, the daughter of a prominent local family. He was 33 years old. Josefa was 14. On the frontier of that era, the match raised few eyebrows, but the number sits there in the record, cold and jarring, and it deserves to be said plainly. Josefa would become the anchor of his life, bearing him 7 children over 25 years of marriage. She was the home he kept riding away from. And in 1846, he rode away into the darkest chapter yet. That summer, war with Mexico ignited, and Carson was in California with Fremont during the chaos of the Bear Flag Revolt. In June, near San Rafael, Carson's men intercepted 3 civilians coming ashore from a boat. An elderly ranchero named Jose de los Reyes Berryessa and his twin nephews, Francisco and Ramon de Haro. They were unarmed. Carson sent word to Fremont asking what to do with them. Fremont's answer, as recorded in the accounts of the campaign, was chilling in its brevity. "I have no room for prisoners." Carson understood exactly what that meant. He and his men shot all 3 of them dead on the spot. An old man and 2 20-year-old twins executed without charge, without trial, without a weapon between them. The dime novels never mentioned that scene, but it revealed the fatal flaw in Kit Carson's character. The flaw that would eventually consume him. When a superior gave an order, Carson obeyed, no matter what the order was. The violence soon came home. In January 1847, rebels in Taos rose up against the American occupation and killed Carson's brother-in-law, Governor Charles Bent. reportedly scalping him alive in front of his own family while Josepha's relatives hid inside the house. Carson was away serving as a courier and could do nothing. The horror of it hardened something in him. In the years that followed, he tried to build a quieter life. From 1854, he served as a federal Indian agent in New Mexico, and by most accounts, he was one of the more honest men ever to hold that corrupt job. He argued for the Utes, pushed back against swindlers, and pleaded with a distant government to honor its promises. He genuinely believed he was protecting native peoples. He had no idea he was about to become the instrument of their destruction. In 1861, the Civil War split the country, and Carson resigned his post to organize New Mexico volunteers for the Union. He fought bravely at the Battle of Val Verde. But the war he's remembered for began in October 1862, when a new commander arrived to run the Department of New Mexico, General James H. Carleton. If this story has a true monster, it's Carleton. Rigid, self-righteous, and utterly ruthless, he saw Native Americans as an obstacle to be removed permanently. His first target was the Mescalero Apache, and his written orders to Carson were genocidal on their face. The men of the tribe were to be killed, in his words, whenever and wherever they could be found. Carson refused to carry that out. When Mescalero leaders came to surrender, he accepted them and protected them, defying the spirit of his orders. He also asked to resign, reportedly more than once. Carleton refused, flattered him, pressured him. And Carson, the obedient soldier, stayed. It was the most catastrophic decision of his life, because Carleton's next target was the Navajo. In the summer of 1863, Carleton ordered Carson to bring the entire Navajo nation, the Diné, to its knees. Carson knew he couldn't defeat them in open battle. They knew their homeland too well, and they simply melted away into the canyons. So he waged war on something that couldn't run, their food. Through the fall and winter, his troops swept across Navajo country, burning hogans, torching cornfields, seizing horses, and slaughtering sheep by the thousands, the animals that were the center of Navajo wealth, culture, and survival. Then, in January 1864, he drove his campaign into the heart of the Navajo world, Canyon de Chelly, a sandstone cathedral of red cliffs where the Diné had lived for centuries. His men marched through it end to end, destroying everything. The final act was the one the Navajo would never forget. Carson ordered the destruction of the canyon's peach orchards, over 3,000 trees, cultivated for generations, chopped down one by one. It was systematic, it was thorough, and it worked exactly as intended. That winter, starving and freezing, the Navajo began walking out of the mountains to surrender, not because they were beaten in battle, but because their children were dying of hunger. By spring, around 8,000 people had given themselves up to the U.S. Army. Carson's famous victory involved almost no battles at all. It was a war against orchards and sheep won on the bodies of the starving. And the worst part, the part held back until now, is what happened to those 8,000 people next. Carson himself went home. His health was already failing. Years earlier, in 1860, a horse had dragged him down a mountainside in a brutal fall, and something inside his chest had never healed. Through the mid-1860s, a deadly problem was quietly growing near his heart. An aneurysm, a swelling, weakening bulge in his aorta, expanding year by year into his neck and chest. Whispers of a darker disease circulated, as they always did in that era, but doctors then and historians now blame the fall from the horse. Whatever the cause, the effect was a slow-motion execution. The mass pressed against his windpipe. Breathing became labor. Lying down became agony. The great scout of the American West was slowly suffocating. And as his body failed, he finally saw, clearly, and far too late, what he had done. Because here is the full story the peach trees only began to tell. After the surrenders of 1864, the army forced the Navajo to march from their homeland to a barren reservation called Bosque Redondo on the Pecos River. A journey of roughly 300 miles, on foot, in winter and early spring. The Navajo remember it as the Long Walk, and their oral histories preserve what the official reports sanitized. Stragglers who couldn't keep up were shot by the escorts. Survivor accounts tell of exhausted elders and even women in labor left behind or killed where they fell. Carson did not lead that march. He had returned to his family, and the shootings were carried out by army escorts and territorial militia. But every mile of it flowed directly from his campaign. More than 200 people died on the trail. And Bosque Redondo, the reservation waiting at the end, was a death trap wearing a government seal. The water was alkaline and sickening. The crops failed year after year. Firewood ran out. Disease tore through the camps. Over the 4 years that followed, more than 2,000 Navajo men, women, and children died there. Of starvation, exposure, and sickness, in what historians today describe plainly as a concentration camp. For over a century, the military record framed all of this as a relocation. It wasn't until recent decades, especially after historians began elevating Navajo oral histories and after Hampton Sides' landmark 2006 history Blood and Thunder reframed the campaign for a mass audience, that the full scale of the catastrophe entered the mainstream. The schoolbook scout, modern research made clear, was the author of a humanitarian apocalypse. And Carson knew it. That's the final, devastating twist of his life. In early 1868, dying by inches, barely able to breathe, he made one last journey. Not west, but east to Washington, D.C. He went as an escort and advocate for Ute leaders, pleading with the federal government to honor its treaties and protect Native peoples from the flood of white settlement he himself had helped unleash. Newspapermen who saw him were shocked. The legendary frontiersman was gray, gasping, visibly dying. The man who had perfected the art of starving Native Americans spent his last months of life begging the president's government to feed and protect them. The machine he'd served so obediently didn't stop, of course. Machines never do. But he tried, with the little breath he had left. He came home to Colorado in the spring of 1868 to a final blow. On April 27th, his beloved Josepha died from complications after giving birth to their 7th child. Carson, by every account, lost the will to live. He lasted less than a month. On May 23, 1868, at Fort Lyon, Colorado, the aneurysm that had been strangling him finally ruptured. His last words reportedly were to the army surgeon at his side, "Doctor, compadre, adios." He was 58 years old, and he died drowning in his own blood, the man who choked the life out of Canyon de Chelly, killed at last by the mass choking the life out of him. 1 month later, in June 1868, the government signed a treaty, finally allowing the surviving Navajo to walk home from Bosque Redondo. The thing Kit Carson begged for in his dying months happened just weeks after he stopped breathing. The Navajo rebuilt, the peach trees in time were replanted, and the penny-priced runaway, who became America's favorite hero, went into the ground carrying the one truth the dime novels never printed. He had seen the horrors of the conquest of the West more intimately than any man alive, because so many of them were his. Thanks for watching channel. If you love uncovering the best stories in history, hit like and subscribe to keep exploring with us.